Hey, Comic-Con.com. I'm Tom Smithyman, and it's my pleasure today to spend just a few minutes with Jason Michael Primrose. Now, Jason, of course, has written the Lost Children of Andromeda novel series, which he is now adopting into a comic book. And he is launching a new crowdfunding campaign on Zoop to help fund that comic. Jason, welcome to Comic-Con.com.
Hello, this is so cool.
Well, we'll see about that. It's going to depend on your answers, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't we launch right into it, Jason? And you're pretty much a crowdfunding veteran, right? You've raised over $60,000 to crowdfund the two novels in the Lost Children of Andromeda series. So why don't you start off by talking a little bit about the novels themselves? What's the story behind them? And talk to us about why you took this unusual step to crowdfund the books themselves. And then we'll talk about the comic book.
Sure. Well, the books themselves are about the apocalypse. So it's a mix of dystopian, sci-fi, kind of apocalyptic as it's happening, and like superhero genres mashed together, and a bit of cyberpunk. And what we're facing is 215 days until the actual end of the world, where um, climate-fueled natural disasters are tearing away at the infrastructure, and they believe there's one thing that can save humanity, and they're looking for that thing. They're fighting for that thing in the novel 2050Z Time and Salvation, which I crowdfunded in 2021.
Well, also, so talk to us about the follow-up novel, and then why you chose to crowdfund them.
Yeah, so Zosma was an interesting experience. I actually wrote that in 2018, and it's actually the sequel to 2050Z, and that follows the presence of an alien energy that they believe will also save the world. So we've got these kind of things that we think will be the thing that will work, and often they are maybe controversially could be, could not be. And in terms of crowdfunding, I really did a lot of research around, I think it was like 2016, 2015, about independent publishing was the first thing. And then the second thing was, okay, well, how do you get an audience for, what you're creating? And not really knowing the publisher route, or not really wanting to go down that route, I figured I know enough people, maybe I could crowdfund this thing. So I did a lot of work with the first one in 2018. I did a rap video that I knew like friends and family would enjoy, and that raised a ton of money. And then I went, and then in 2021 had kind of spent some time writing a really powerful story that I really, really, really love, and had built a little bit of an audience at that time. And so it was not just, friends and family. It was like people that had read Zosma or were interested in what was coming, this new story. And yeah, so it's been great. I definitely suggest it for, for comics, I think it's a lot easier. But for novels, I've had great success.
Yeah, it's a unique step to take, but clearly a pretty successful one from your perspective, right? So now fast forward to 2023, and you are again, doing a crowdfunding campaign, this time on Zoop, and you are trying to turn one of the stories, right, into one of the novels into a comic book. Why are you going in that direction? Why a comic book when you've already had a novel in play?
Yeah, so what we decided to do, and this is like myself and then a few strategic partners, is that we wanted to tell the characters' stories before they get to the novel. And one of the things that's really cool is that all of the characters experience one of the major disasters that lead to this apocalypse. And so they're basically these character origin stories. So where were the characters before we see them in the novel? And so all the comics, there's 23 of them, are these vignettes of the characters before they get to the story. We did it because it's visual. You really get to kind of choose characters. There's cameos and crossovers, and it's a really fun way and digestible way to introduce the characters and kind of lead people into the bigger series. So that's kind of the idea behind it. The first one that we're doing now is The Arrival, and it's actually an adaptation of the prologue of the book 2050Z Time and Salvation. And the biggest thing there is that in novels, you have to write from one character's perspective. And so we really only know what Alistair knows, who is 7 years old at the time. Whereas with a comic, not only are we in the present versus telling the story from the past, but then we also get the context behind everything that's happening, and you really get to see and experience other characters in there in a different way. So that to me was really fun to kind of expand and explore. And I think for anyone who's read the novel or read the prologue, it's a totally different experience because of that visual element and then the expanded story.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like you're able to do things that you couldn't do right in the novel. What are the challenges that you're facing when you're trying to write a comic book? And it's kind of an adaptation, kind of not, I guess. But when you're writing the comic versus the challenges that you faced writing a novel.
That's a great question. I'm not familiar with the format. With anything scripted, less is more. And so I find myself having to pull back on certain elements that will become visual. Like I don't need to overly describe, anything necessarily, or describe them in a prose fashion. Giving someone like a visual reference or some kind of comparison works. So I have to take the time to not try to make it a work of art, the script. And so that's been really challenging. I've actually, because that was already kind of a short story in itself, the other comics that I'm writing, I'm actually writing them as short stories first and then adapting them, which is kind of time consuming, but it helps me get to the characters' emotions and how they feel. And then I translate that, otherwise I feel like I write too shallow. Like I won't go into how what's happening is impacting the character. And so, yeah, so those are the main challenges. At first, I was just very intimidated by the idea of writing anything script format, that I wouldn't get the descriptions right, or that I wouldn't get it formatted correctly, or that the artist wouldn't be able to understand what I was trying to say. But I read a few comics scripts that I really liked, like Neil Gaiman's Sandman, and I just love the way that he communicates with the artist and how he describes what he sees happening, but then also is open to what the artist sees in and how he's saying it. And it's very casual. It's like a conversation. That's how he wrote his script. And so I kind of adopted that style.
You're setting the bar pretty high if you're starting with Gaiman, right?
Yeah. Well, I also read a book called Words for Pictures, I think it's called, by Brian Bendis. Yeah. I mean, that just really gave me the confidence to dive in because it was so clear. And then hearing it from both sides, writer, artist, and then the different styles and formats of kind of telling the story on the page, Marvel style versus full script. So yeah, really great read.
Well, you mentioned two things that sort of piqued my curiosity. One is that you're basically writing full short stories that will then be converted into comic books, and you use books plural, right? So I guess my twofold question is, one, are there more comics in this series that you anticipate after The Arrival? And two, are you going to publish those short stories in a separate volume of collections for Lost Children of Andromeda, or are you just going to keep them hidden away and take with you to your grave?
The vault. The thing is, I don't know how much like editorial polishing I'm going to do to those manuscripts. So they may be novel for someone who cares what it looked like raw, but I think I will focus on I'll focus on developing the narrative that makes sure like we're hitting the plot points and it like moves along fast enough. But then all the editing work will really be inside of the script. And so we have an origin comic for every character. So like I've already started on the next one. And so every character has this origin story that has its own title, and it follows them through the onset of a major disaster and wherever they are. And I actually like voice noted, like I recorded voice notes of all of the storylines for the first 7 characters. So I already know what happens. And really it's about taking that, using Otter to get the dictation down on paper, and then kind of writing into it from there. So that I feel good about, because I already know how they cross over and what happens and who appears where and everything. And that's for the first 7 characters, which what we consider the heroes. And then next are the villains. There's 7 of them, and then there's 7 kind of morally ambiguous characters that we don't really know what side they fall on. And the plan is to compile them into graphic novels at the end. So 3 volumes, basically heroes, villains, and the in-betweens. So
Neutrals.
neutrals, yeah. So that's like the big vision. I suspect it will take me a few years. And during that time, I won't really be writing more novels. But I think giving people these digestible, highly visual, kind of very exciting, snippets of these characters' lives will do a lot for the awareness of the series in general.
Yeah, for sure. It's quite a world universe that you're building. The original books, or the original novels, were prose, but they also contain some imagery in them, right? They contain some character cards, or sort of description, not descriptions, but actually drawings, sort of rough drawings of what they actually look like. Why did you take that step, and did that make the conversion over to the comic book easier, or did it present challenges for the illustrator?
I remember reading books when they had pictures in them. I know that they do that still, but I remember reading books and there always would be these really cool photos and then like sprinkled throughout, and so being a visual person, I really wanted to have these really high quality images of characters or fight scenes or environments, featured in the story. So, give the reader some eye candy. And so I took that route, partnered with an artist, and they really helped me visualize the world. And so we used a lot of those photos as reference photos, but every artist has their own style. And so when we went to make the arrival, we even got to pay homage to like specific shots that appear in the book, in the comic version. So I think overall it's fun. It gives me something to point to. Now I can show them what the characters look like and what kind of outfits they wear. And if we need to use an environment, okay, well, here's what the environment looked like. And so there's a consistency of the world that is supported by this visual element.
That's great. Now, you also used NFTs, right? You created essentially an interactive game for the novels. Is any of that going to transfer over to the comic?
NFTs are a very interesting idea right now. What we are doing with regards to the gamified reading is more about the literature experience as a whole and less about my series and specifically. And when I went into that endeavor, it really was about kind of using tokens to reward readers for their engagement in my story. And there's just a larger opportunity there to support rewarding readers for their engagement in any story, especially in a genre like this. So that for me is on the back burner because it's like a big technological endeavor. But it is something that I'm working on kind of behind the scenes. And with regards to everything else, we wanted to support a more normalized relationship between digital assets and the consumer, a collector. So we're not doing abstract items as collectibles. We're doing actual comics. So we do have we do have like digital versions of the comics that are mentioned on the blockchain that can be collected. But we also have it, physical versions and everything like that for people who aren't wanting to dive into that world. It's just there's a lot of friction there. And so I don't really expect people to try to go down that path. I've been in it for 2 years. I studied it. But when you have to ask someone to do 4 things before they can buy the thing that you are asking them to buy, that to me that's not a consumer journey that anyone would want to take.
Yeah, it's not a very smooth consumer experience, to your point.
No, no,
Yeah.
it's actually it's just that there's so much friction, and you hit friction at every point, and that's really the challenge.
Talk a little bit about the arrival itself, this more contained story. There's a catastrophic storm that is threatening the town of Cumberland Falls, where our hero Alistair Adams is. We have heard an awful lot about storms, bad storms here on Earth today in 2023. A hurricane season is, we're in the middle of it right now, and it's a pretty bad one. I assume that there's some kind of an intentional parallel there.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting about the storm is that at this point, which is 2040, we've been experiencing a ton of storms, especially these kind of really intense storms in the South and Midwest, like in that area, but all over the world. And so the storm looks like the kind of storms that we've been experiencing, these kind of like larger than life, lots of rain, lots of activity, crazy wind. That's what the storm appears like. It's very ominous. And that's what Alistair thinks it is too. And then as they're kind of like going through their driving, his dad is like, this is different. This is like the West Coast earthquake, which everyone in that time knows that the West Coast earthquake in 2035 basically devastated the United States West, and no one goes there anymore.
It was the big one.
It was the big one. So the big one took out California and a lot of those places, and so people don't even go past Idaho anymore. It's just everyone's kind of concentrated on the East and Midwest. So Alistair now, kind of even at his young age, knowing that happened, now is trying to understand how big this storm is, and because it could mean the end of everything that he knows and sees, the way that it meant the end of LA and all surrounding areas. So yeah, it is kind of you kind of get dropped into that like childlike fear, and then also this idea that a storm's about to take out this town, and everyone's like they're not really ready for it.
Well, I think again, there's a lot of parallels to what a lot of us are feeling today, right?
Yeah.
For better or for worse. So as we wrap up, what's next for you? It sounds like you've got a couple of years worth of work working specifically on the comic variations of this. Anything outside of Lost Children of Andromeda that you're thinking about? Or is it you're sort of all in for the time being?
I'm all in for the time being. I have some other, I write poetry, so I have some other things like that are completely like out of the genre. But I'm really excited about these comics. I'm almost finished with the next short story, which is about Chicago being destroyed in a flood. So there's a lot.
What I'm getting from this is stay away from big cities.
Yeah. Well, but those are the sanctuaries. I mean, those are where those are what become the hubs. But they're just not, and they do the best they can to protect themselves. So the Chicago story is very interesting because we're dealing with a dam, we're dealing with the Great Lakes, we're dealing with a rainstorm, like a monsoon style rainstorm, and yeah, so that is going to be my next like 2 to 3 months. And then after that, there's 5 more stories in this kind of original hero arc that I plan to finish.
And you expect to crowdfund all of them?
We will crowdfund all of them. Yeah, I believe so. I normally don't do crowdfunding that often. Like normally we do like every 2 years, but I believe that these will be able to be crowdfunded and then kind of taken through the Comic-Con circuit. And I think that's probably the best path for them.
Excellent. Well, best of luck in your all of your endeavors, in particular for The Arrival, which is now on Zoop. Our guest again was Jason Michael Primrose, the author of Lost Children of Andromeda, and frequent and more frequent crowdfunder. Jason, thanks very much. You'll find the link to the Zoop campaign on the write-up for this interview. So please visit. And if you think it makes sense and you're interested, please feel free to give some money Jason's way, and I'm sure he'll appreciate it.
Yeah.
Parting thoughts, Jason?
I know that visually the story is stunning. I mean, it's like jaw-droppingly gorgeous. The artist Alexis Vasquez did an incredible job. And it's got a lot of character, it's got a lot of heart, and I think people will really enjoy it, and the others to follow. So definitely support the campaign.
Sounds great. Best of luck to you and in everything else that you're working on.
Thank you so much.